Hello, welcome to a new episode of Germany in Focus, a podcast made possible by members of The Local. Today we're breaking down all the 2025 budget drama that's been happening in Germany, including the coalition's plans to introduce a tax rebate for foreign skilled workers. Taylor Swift-mania is just about to take over Germany. We're talking about the German leg of her Eras tour and the city that has renamed itself in honor of the global pop star. What can get you evicted from your flat when you're renting in Germany? We're looking into this reader question to help you understand tenants' rights. And Berlin has always been known as a cheap city to live in, but those days are pretty much long gone. According to one recent survey, it's the most expensive city in Germany. Lastly, as we head into the full-on summer period, we're talking about how to do the warmer months like a German. I'm Rachel Loxton, and I'm in Berlin today with journalists Imogen Goodman and Paul Krantz. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
How are you both?
Ooh, sweltering, actually, but good.
Yeah, hi. It is warm out today, indeed. I was quite sweaty on my way over here, and then I got sweaty again just sitting in the little booth here.
Yeah, we're way too hot. It's very, very humid. But guys, can you believe Euro 2024 is almost over?
Wow.
We have the semi-finals this week, and then we have the final on Sunday in Berlin.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you going to watch it if you're planning to?
Well, I don't really want to break the habit of my tournament, which has been just watching it outside various spätis in Berlin. That always is the nice, good atmosphere. I think there is an event that me and my friends are going to at the Fan Zone the day before, some music happening there. That's on Saturday. So yeah, I'm really excited. But I think, just a run-of-the-mill späti is good enough for me for the final.
Are you going to watch it, Paul?
Yeah, I definitely will watch it as well. I probably, in a very similar fashion to Imogen, I really like watching in front of the spätis or maybe a pub. There's this spot in Hasenheide that I've wanted to check out for yesterday's match, and that was France versus Spain on Tuesday.
Yeah, we're recording this on Wednesday, by the way, so we don't know who the second team that's going to be in the final is yet.
Right. But for the match where Spain beat France, I watched at the new Neulich Brewery in Tempelhoferfeld, which was a nice place to be. Pretty casual.
I've had some fun memories there over the years. Nice place to watch tournaments.
Yes, me too, actually. I just remembered. That's actually a good shout. But I imagine for the final, that will be packed.
It will be.
Could be pretty busy, yeah.
Get there early.
Absolutely. Guys, it's the last time we're recording this podcast before a summer break.
Oh,
I know.
Yay. Oh.
It's sad, but, we need a break. So before we get into what we're talking about today, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all our listeners and everyone who has supported us. It's been another brilliant year for us putting together all of the episodes. As always, we would love to hear your feedback. Please leave a review or a rating wherever you get your podcasts, or get in touch with us by emailing germanyinfocus@thelocal.com. And also thank you to those listeners who are members of The Local Germany. You are the reason this podcast exists. So thank you so much. And if you do want to join The Local, there's a special offer in the show notes, so you can check it out. And we'll be back in September.
Yes, it's not the last episode ever.
No.
That's good. I'm very happy about that.
We're still going.
Back in fall with the new season.
Let's get into what's been in the news. One of the biggest stories we've seen in Germany in the last week is the coalition government, or at least Chancellor Olaf Scholz, the economics minister Robert Habeck, and finance minister Christian Lindner have finally agreed on a budget plan for next year. So this had been causing sleepless nights for everyone involved, probably. And they actually pulled an all-nighter to get this agreement together. They announced it on Friday morning. Imogen, can you tell us what they came up with? What is the 2025 budget looking like?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to mention, other than it finally being here, is that it is still just a draft. It isn't the finalised budget. So there's a lot that could get amended or shifted around once the bill kind of goes through this parliamentary process. As one commentator put it, legislation never leaves Parliament looking the same as it did when it went in. But the main thing is that, yes, we have finally got this agreement, and it does seem like these months of deadlock have finally come to an end. So hopefully we can stop talking about it for a bit.
Yeah.
So the big question that the three coalition parties, so that's the Social Democrats, the Greens, the FDP, Free Democrats, have been really agonising over for all these weeks is whether Germany should stick to this debt rate. So that's a cap on borrowing that is enshrined in German law. It's in the constitution, actually. So there are some questions, or were some questions at least, about whether this could get reformed in order to maybe invest more, shore up these green transformation initiatives. But ultimately, that did come to nothing. And the FDP finance minister, Christian Lindner, effectively really got his way. He made a massive red line about changing that debt break and those borrowing rules. So that means that they're only planning to borrow 44 billion euros next year in a 481 billion budget, which makes it quite likely that there are going to be some scowling faces in various departments. Their budgets are not going to be what they hoped for, and there could be some cuts. Having said that, I wouldn't really describe this as an austerity budget. There are plenty of plans in there to stimulate the economy and invest in all that critical infrastructure that really is getting quite creaky in Germany. Anyone who's taken a train recently knows that.
Right.
So next year, the government plans to pour a record 57 billion euros into improving things like railways, roads, digital infrastructure and local public transport. And it's also guaranteed its climate protection fund for the next few years, which is something the Greens were really pushing for. There's also going to be 20 billion euros poured into social housing over the next few years, and also a further 23 billion euros in tax cuts designed to stimulate the economy, which apparently will be targeted at employees as well as businesses and the self-employed. One area that isn't quite getting the investment it expected is defence, which is only getting a very minor increase in funding this year, possibly meaning that big revamp of the Bundeswehr that Scholz has talked about, that Zeitenwende, might have to wait.
So, yeah, they got through quite a lot in this initial draft agreement, as you mentioned, not set in stone. Any other key things that our listeners, many of them being foreign residents in Germany, should know about?
Yeah, there's a few big things. So we mentioned these tax cuts, and one proposal on the table is very specifically targeted at foreign residents. So what they're proposing is that they offer these special tax breaks to foreign skilled workers who move to the country to really encourage them to pick Germany. So that could mean that new arrivals get a tax rate rebate on 30% of their salary in their first year of work, 20% in the second year, and 10% in the third year. And that would really be a huge discount, especially if you're potentially on one of these skilled worker tech salaries, perhaps, or an engineer's salary. Mm-hmm. There is also a lot in there for families with children. Kindergeld, or child benefit, is set to go up by €5 next year before it's phased out to make way for this all-in-one Kindergrundsicherung, or basic child security payment. And that's going to be €255 per child per month. The tax-deductible amount for parents will also increase by €228 to €9,540 in 2025, and then by a further €60 the following year. One thing, actually, I'm sure parents who've been affected by these recent Kita strikes will be very pleased about is that there's also going to be an extra €2 billion put into improving childcare facilities over the coming years. Lastly, there is one very important thing that I think everyone will be pleased to hear, and that is that the government has made a pledge to try and tackle bureaucracy in Germany and make sure official processes move a lot faster. Exactly. Now, I'm not sure how successful they will be. They always promise that, but we can always dream. I'm gonna reserve judgment here. I'm just gonna say we can hope.
Yeah, I mean, they are just like always talking about it at the moment. They're always just like, we must tackle our bureaucracy problem. And we're like, yeah, just do it.
Yeah, do it. I know.
Just get on with it.
Too much bureaucracy, I suppose, involved in dismantling the bureaucracy. Who knows?
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and also I did see that there was a big focus on families, and they were very keen to publicise that and push that. Yeah. What's the reaction so far been to all of this?
Well, on the coalition side, the relief is really palpable. So despite the obvious lack of sleep, Scholz, Habeck and Lindner were really in very high spirits when they announced this breakthrough. And this ultimately really just sends this sign that the traffic light coalition has weathered yet another storm. It lives to fight another day. And that really did not feel like a certainty a couple of weeks ago. So that's a huge development. They are sticking together through thick and thin. There has, of course, been some criticism, particularly the criticism of the compromises that they have set out in this draft. So people on the left, for instance, will be pretty disappointed that there was no wide-scale reform of the debt brake or even loosening those rules this time around. And there are voices on the right, and actually Defence Minister Boris Pistorius, also from the SPD, that have been heavily critical of this lack of additional funding for the Bundeswehr at such a critical time with war in Ukraine. The thing that has caused the biggest stir, however, is this proposal to give foreign workers more beneficial tax conditions than Germans and other people already here. So that one really has had some people very much up in arms. Julia Klöckner was one of them. She's an economic policy specialist at the CDU. She gave a quote to Welt where she said she thought the plan amounted to discrimination against nationals. And CSU Bavarian parliamentary leader Klaus Holleczek even went one step further and described it as a threat to social peace. We also heard some tough words from Sarah Wagenknecht, who's this left-wing defector who set up her own anti-migrant party, and she really questioned whether the move would possibly contravene the equality clause that's set out in the German constitution, whether it's legal, in other words.
And also even from within the coalition, because the Labour minister, Hubertus Heil, he said he wasn't terribly happy about it.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a divisive one. I think this feeling of some people getting preferential treatment really hasn't gone down well.
Yeah, but it's all to address the worker shortage that Germany is dealing with.
Which is good for everyone.
Yeah, there's lots of ins and outs with that. So what happens next?
Well, yes, as I mentioned, this isn't the end of negotiations and horse trading over this budget. Like I said, the draft now exists, but it still needs to go through the entire parliamentary process before it can enter into law. So the next date to look out for will be July 17th, when the government hopes to approve this more detailed draft in the cabinet before they break up for the summer recess. Over summer, people will be poring over these figures, and once MPs return in the autumn, that is when the real debates and horse trading will begin, especially as we'll have a lot more detail about where some of those really painful cuts to departmental budgets are going to be.
So we'll be talking about this again.
Yes. Yeah, bring on September.
Yep. Thank you so much for those updates, Imogen. As one huge multi-city event comes to an end in Germany soon, that's the Euros, another one is about to begin. That's right, Taylor Swift is arriving for the German leg of her Eras tour. One German city has even changed its name for the occasion. Paul, can you tell us about this special renamed city and a few key things about this Germany tour?
So the city formerly known as Gelsenkirchen is now temporarily called Swiftkirchen.
Amazing.
Wow.
And that will be Taylor Swift's first stop in Germany on her Eras tour. And the city is really leaning into the Swift-mania leading up to this event. So the name change was initiated by a local Swiftie who wrote a letter to the mayor and started a petition about it. And beyond the name change, the city is really going all out on this appeal to the fans. So they've got yellow signs with the new city name and also a portrait of Swift in pink up on display in the city center. In place of like the old signs that would have just been a yellow sign with the name Gelsenkirchen printed, right? There's also a dedicated Swifties train, which is basically like a streetcar wrapped in images of the pop star. And it stops in the middle of the city at the so-called Taylortown meeting point, where fans are invited to join in karaoke before the concerts.
So this is so cool.
Yeah, really a lot going on for Swift fans.
Right.
Taylor Swift will perform 3 back-to-back shows in Gelsenkirchen at the Veltins Arena on July 17th, 18th, and 19th. And by the way, that's the same arena where some Euro 2024 matches were recently played. And as I mentioned once before on this podcast, that arena has a retractable field. So the concert goers there won't actually be trampling on the soccer pitch. But after this, she'll play 2 more shows in Hamburg on July 23rd and 24th. And then she'll end her tour, or at least her German leg of the tour, with a couple shows in Munich on the 27th and 28th.
Love this. Are you two going?
Well, actually, I'm kind of tempted now.
Yeah.
I'm just impressed by Swift-Kirchen's great high-tech technology with the stadium. I'm impressed by them rebranding the town. It sounds like a lot of fun, but no, to be honest, I won't be.
I failed to get a ticket. All the tickets sold out to, I think, all of her shows in Europe, like within minutes of going online.
Oh.
But you can buy secondhand tickets. They're going for, do you want to guess how much?
Oh, thousands.
Yeah, 500, starting at 500 to 1,000 or more.
Wow.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's expensive. So what should the fans who are going and perhaps even the locals too keep in mind about these gigs?
Well, first off, fans are definitely in for a show of epic proportions, I think it's fair to say. The Eras Tour has been a big phenomenon everywhere it's gone, really, and it's known for being this really massive production. Each show runs for 3 hours and includes songs from all of Taylor Swift's 19 albums. Also, just as a personal tip from me to anyone going, you don't want to miss the opener. The rock band Paramore is opening up for Taylor Swift. I used to be a fan. In my opinion, that's also sure to be a performance worth watching. Hayley Williams, singer of Paramore, is a great singer and an absolute babe.
She is, to be fair.
I think, especially for those going to the concerts in Gelsenkirchen, it's worth keeping in mind that the city is pretty small. And it's got a total population around 260,000, whereas each of these concerts are going to bring in 70,000 fans. And that's 70,000 like times 3, like 3 back-to-back days. So you can really imagine the city is going to be operating at kind of max capacity during this time. And it's probably safe to expect a fair amount of traffic around the city. And also recently during these Euro 2024 matches, there was quite a bit of travel chaos involved where fans were left waiting at the local train stop for hours afterwards. So it might be worth considering alternative transport options if you have any. Like if you're staying really close to the arena, you could try biking there, for example. But generally, residents living in any of these cities where Taylor Swift will perform can expect to witness some fanfare as thousands of glittered Swifties will descend upon their neighborhoods.
Love it. Do you have a favorite Taylor Swift song, Paul?
Ooh, I'm not going to remember the title of it now, but I enjoy her older albums, like the Red Album or 1989. I like a lot of songs off those.
Yeah, me too. I don't really know the new stuff so well, but I like those. So there were a lot of reports previously about Taylor Swift boosting the US economy. Should we expect the same here in Germany? Of course, Germany famously is having a very sluggish economy moment.
Yeah, well, Germany can certainly expect a boost from so-called Swiftonomics. That's the term coined for the economic boom that has been observed in cities around Taylor Swift concerts. Every American city that has hosted an Eras Tour show has seen a boost in businesses, in retail, in food and beverage, hotel room sales. It was estimated that in total, the tour generated $5 billion in consumer spending in the U.S. in 6 months.
It's the size of some national economies.
I know.
Exactly.
Crazy stuff.
And additionally, it's been reported that Taylor Swift's shows in Paris in May brought more than 5 times as many American travelers to the city than the Paris Olympics is expected to.
Wow.
Oh, is this bigger than the Euros?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't think so, but...
Possibly.
Yeah.
It's up there.
Yeah, these are not small impacts. And it's quite funny to me, by the way, but it also says a lot about the reality of Swift's kind of economic influence, that there are economists and finance leaders on the record calling Taylor Swift a, quote, economic force. But whatever amount of force that will bring to Germany is maybe to be seen. It's definitely will be appreciated here. As you mentioned, Germany has kind of been hobbling along, just barely avoiding a recession in the first part of this year. I don't think Taylor Swift's tour by itself will really change the kind of bigger macroeconomic picture for Germany, but it will certainly be a boon. And especially for local economies near the concert area, they'll see some boost. Interestingly, the economic news outlet Fortune had a report saying the tour's impact could be even bigger or more widespread in Europe, as opposed to the US. And one reason they cited was Europe's stronger public transportation networks, which allow concertgoers to kind of spread out a bit more in the regions. So instead of just the local city kind of benefiting from this, maybe the wider regions around these cities will also feel these impacts.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds amazing. I'm actually interested to see all the pictures of all the fans and everything in the coming weeks. I'm sure it will be great.
It will be a spectacle for sure.
We are moving on now to a reader question that comes up fairly often in different forms for us at The Local. As many of our listeners will know, Germany is a country of renters. Around half the population rents rather than owns their own home. So having an idea of the rights around this topic is really good to know, especially when you're a foreign resident and not so familiar with the laws. Imogen, you have been looking into this topic for us. Why are questions about evictions coming up quite a lot at the moment?
Housing is always a pretty big topic in Germany, especially those really severe housing shortages and these soaring rents that we've been talking about in the major cities, this housing crisis that seems to be spread all over the country. So finding a place to live is obviously one of the first and arguably the most challenging task foreigners face after moving to Germany. And it can be especially hard to protect yourself from maybe scams or dodgy landlords if you really don't know your rights. A couple of months ago, we reported on The Local about sophisticated scammers in Berlin who are increasingly preying on renters in places where the housing crisis is really dire. We spoke to a couple who had been conned out of thousands of euros for a flat in Berlin Neukölln that turned out not to even be up to rent. On the other side, of course, you've got landlords who want to squeeze as much money out of their tenants as possible, especially in cities like Berlin, where rents are rising fast. I've actually heard some horror stories recently online about people being quite aggressively sort of harassed by their landlords to move out because they're maybe on an older contract and their landlord has realised, I can charge double here if I can just get this pesky older tenant to move and get someone new in.
I've also heard that and seen a lot of that. So it's definitely getting worse and worse. But let's look at what your landlord or Hausverwaltung actually can evict you for, because there are cases where they can't ask you to leave, right?
Exactly, yeah. So the first thing to really be aware of is that tenants' rights are actually really strong in Germany. So you don't get those things like no-fault evictions, which you tend to see quite regularly in places like the UK and the US. So really, there are only a few scenarios that could see you get evicted from a property in Germany. The first has a lot to do with your behaviour, whereas the second have a lot more to do with the landlord. So in terms of things you can control, breaching the tenancy agreement in some way, like maybe not paying rent for a couple of months or causing significant damage to the property, could definitely result in you being kicked out of the flat. In this case, you'll receive what's known as a fristlose Kündigung. So that's a termination without notice. In terms of things you can't really control, unfortunately, your landlord could argue that they need to use the flat themselves, or that a close family member needs to use it, or that they're suffering hardship economically due to renting the flat to you. Just to clarify, this doesn't mean that a landlord wanting to hike the rents on is grounds for an eviction. They'd have to really, really prove that they would be suffering a huge financial disadvantage in order to force you out. There's also a little bit of confusion about whether selling the flat can be grounds to evict a tenant, but the law on that is pretty clear. It's not the case unless the new landlord, as I say, has a really strong reason for needing to use the flat themselves.
Mm-hmm. What are the most common behaviours or things that tend to land residents in Germany in trouble with their landlord or housing company?
Yeah, there are quite a few. It slightly depends on your rental contract. But as I mentioned, not paying rent for a couple of months in a row, perhaps regularly missing rent payments could definitely be grounds for eviction. Another big one, which of course is very common, is subletting the flat without the landlord's permission, or perhaps illegally over-occupying it, moving new people in when the flat is too small. If your contract expressly forbids it, you could also get evicted for moving in a pet, a new dog or a cat maybe, without permission, or for carrying out unauthorized work or renovations. Also, if you are constantly breaching house rules, like having maybe very regular loud parties in the quiet hours, or barbecuing naked on your balcony, perhaps, that could also be grounds for eviction. Though in this case, you really do have to be a repeat offender. So one naked barbecue is probably okay.
Okay, that is good to know. If there is a reason where you are being evicted, do you have to leave immediately, or what is the notice period? Does that depend?
Yes, it's very German. It depends on a few different factors. And the first is whether you are to blame for the eviction or not. So if the landlord just needs to use the property themselves, the amount of notice they have to give you will depend on how long you've lived there. So in most cases, 3 months will be an ordinary termination period, but this can be extended up to 6 months if the tenant has lived in a property for 5 to 8 years. And anything over that, they have to give you 9 months notice before they can kick you out. Of course, in this scenario, you can also try and negotiate with the landlord, particularly if you're really struggling to find somewhere. You never know, maybe they'll be reasonable about it. Maybe they'll let you stay until you have somewhere else sorted. In terms of the Fristlose Kundigung for bad behaviour, they do have to give you a move-out date when they cancel the contract, and usually that will be an absolute minimum of 2 weeks.
Okay. And of course, if you want to query it and you feel your landlord is not explaining things properly, or you think they're doing something wrong, you should 100% get legal help. Or if you're a member of a tenants association, ask for their help, right?
Yeah, definitely. The main thing to do if you get a notice of eviction is act fast, because in some cases you may be facing a pretty tight deadline to move out, as mentioned, maybe 2 weeks. So a really great and affordable option for this legal advice is to join a Mietverein or tenants association. But of course you can also seek the help of a lawyer if you want advice and maybe help in appealing the decision. One thing to really bear in mind is that the burden of proof is on the landlord, and they have to prove you've done something wrong, that they need to use that apartment. So you don't necessarily need to kind of take them at their word. Maybe they don't have that proof that they're claiming they do. With regards to the move-out date as well, it's worth mentioning that your landlord can't enforce this legally without going through the courts, which can be very slow. So that's also something to bear in mind, although, of course, we wouldn't encourage anyone to simply squat in the apartment and hope that it all works out okay. Definitely get some advice.
Good to know. Thanks for that, Imogen. Berlin has traditionally been called poor but sexy. That was the phrase former Mayor Klaus Wowereit said in 2003. Those days are well behind us. Berlin is not really a cheap city to live in anymore, and a new ranking seems to confirm that. According to the annual Mercer Cost of Living Survey, Berlin is the most expensive city in Germany to live in, even overtaking Munich, which usually gets the top spot. And by the way, Frankfurt is also a more expensive place to live than Munich, according to this ranking. Paul, can you tell us more? Firstly, what's happened to Berlin?
Well, put simply, it's gotten more expensive out here, Rach.
Yeah.
As you said, Berlin was ranked the most expensive German city, according to this survey, which looked at the housing costs and of inflation, of course. But it also looked at the cost of some basic consumer goods like eggs, olive oil, gasoline, a haircut, or blue jeans.
Those pesky blue jeans.
Yeah. The price of blue jeans in Berlin, by the way, is actually down 3% compared with 2023, according to the survey data.
Silver linings.
Get those jeans if you need them. Berlin taking the top spot in Germany means it has moved up 6 spots since last year and surpassed Munich, as you said, which I think has kind of held the title as Germany's most expensive city for some time, primarily due to its high rents. But rents have been rising everywhere, and especially in Berlin. And also, as you had mentioned, Frankfurt has jumped up a bit as well and is now more expensive than Munich as well, according to this survey. Personally, I was shocked to see this result at first, and I think it's worth noting that an index published by Germany's Index for the Economy last year actually ranked Berlin as the country's 40th most expensive city, well behind Munich and Frankfurt. So there's obviously quite a sizable discrepancy between this index by the German agency and this survey by Mercer. And I think this discrepancy perhaps hints at something that I've been kind of reflecting on since I saw this, which is that maybe we could kind of say that Berlin has like two cities, or there's two sides to Berlin in socioeconomic terms. This is something we've heard applied to Berlin's rental market, for example. Like people who've been living in Berlin for 10 years or more are probably paying under 10 euros per meter in rent, for example. Whereas everyone moving to the city now or trying to find an apartment in Berlin in the last couple of years is looking at prices well above 20 euros per meter in a lot of neighborhoods. And even for daily goods, I think like depending on what neighborhood you're in and where you like to shop really makes a big difference. So all of which to say, I think Berlin is still a cheap city for some, but these rapidly rising rents and inflation is definitely hitting the city hard.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And also thinking back to what we were just talking about to do with rent rights and stuff, it's very much if you do have an older contract, you're absolutely golden. And if you don't, you're screwed, basically.
Basically, yeah.
which totally sucks. Like, can't we just have somewhere in the middle? Anyway, can you give us a flavour of this survey in a bit more detail, Paul? For example, what other German cities were on it and how do these compare to other cities?
Sure. Maybe first, can I ask you to guess what you think the world's most expensive city is?
I feel like I read this article.
Perhaps you did.
I'll pretend I don't know. Dubai.
I don't, was it Hong Kong?
It was Hong Kong.
Yeah, it was Hong Kong. Followed by Singapore and Zurich. But Berlin, as Germany's most expensive city, was ranked 31st in the world. And between Berlin, Frankfurt, and Munich, those were the three German cities that ranked in the top 50 of the world's most expensive. And then Düsseldorf, Hamburg, Stuttgart, Nuremberg, and Leipzig all made it into the top 100. So German cities decently well represented among the world's most expensive places to live, I guess. But Switzerland, which had 4 cities in the top 10, looks more expensive overall. And the US as well had quite a few cities ahead of Germany's. London, Vienna, Paris, and Amsterdam were all ranked more expensive than Berlin as well. I also think it's important to put these kinds of rankings in context with like some data on income, which this survey didn't really touch on. So, for example, it's true that Berlin is more expensive than, say, Barcelona, which was ranked 66th here. But I think when you account for like the German income being much higher than the Spanish income on average, maybe Berlin is more affordable for more of its residents.
Yeah, exactly. There's a survey is just one part of it, isn't it? There's a lot more details. In another recent survey called the Happy City Index, Berlin was rated the 3rd happiest city in the world. So even though we're talking about Berlin getting more and more expensive overall, it seems like people still want to live here. Can you tell us about this survey and what makes Berlin still a draw for people from all over the world?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I get into that, can I make you guess again? What do you think is the world's happiest city according to the index?
Helsinki.
I was thinking Finland is always the happiest country.
Yeah.
Are they the happiest in Helsinki? That would also be my guess.
According to the index, it was a city in Denmark called Aarhus. Happy people over there. Followed by Zurich, by the way, and then Berlin.
Oh, so where did we get Helsinki?
I mean, Finland does always rank high as a country.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, this Happy City Index considers a number of different aspects of life in cities. And interestingly, one of the main factors that Berlin ranked really well on was the economy. So again, I think this kind of reinforces the idea that costs are rising, but there's still sufficient work opportunities here and social support schemes that keep the city relatively affordable for many. Berlin also ranked well for mobility, which I think is fair. German trains, as we all know, are not the most punctual, and Berlin's public transit is infamously, shall we say, full of interesting characters. But Berlin's public transportation can reliably get you to and from any part of the city well enough that most residents, maybe not most, but many residents choose not to own a car. One long-term resident I spoke to highlighted Berlin's walkability and the fact that you can kind of just go for a stroll virtually anywhere in the city and stumble upon interesting events and fun people. Another resident highlighted Berlin's history. For those who are interested, you'll really never run out of historical sites to visit here. or stories to learn about. And of course, for young music lovers around the world, Berlin's technoculture and world-renowned clubs continue to attract many people to the city.
Absolutely. Yeah, but not Taylor Swift. She's not coming to Berlin.
She cannot come to Berlin. I had heard that it was because there wasn't an arena that was big enough for her here, or at least not one that would be available to
Berlin do better.
She could do Berghain.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, Paul. Right, we're coming to the end of this episode and this season. But before we go, let's talk about how to make the most of summer in Germany like a local. Imogen, are you inspired by the German way of doing summer?
I definitely am. And for me, summer in Germany is really the season of spending as much time as possible outdoors in nature, getting on your bike. That's my personal favorite. I love cycling, heading out to the forest, going for hikes in the mountains, or sitting in a sweaty S-Bahn or regional train, heading out to the countryside. Not that that's nature, but heading towards the nature or your nearest lake. So as I mentioned before on this podcast, I really love wild swimming. And I do try and go in the water all year round. But I have to admit that it is a lot more fun in summer when the water isn't 2 degrees. It's a lot more fun.
Yes.
There is just something so lovely about bobbing around in the water, having a lazy afternoon at the lakeside. And I do think Germans do lake days just so well. They always are in it for the long haul. They bring hammocks, beers, board games, books and food. There's, of course, the FK car culture or Freikörperkultur, where people just get naked, let it all hang out. So that's great. There are some occupational hazards. Of course, the weather is changeable. But I think being chased by a wild hog or having to suddenly pack up your stuff and run away from a thunderstorm, that's all part of the fun. Just get outdoors.
Yeah, it's the whole experience.
It
Paul,
is.
what about you?
I would second all of those. I also thoroughly enjoy the lake visits in the summer. I really like Germany's late summer sunsets as well, even when I'm in the city on a workday. These days, the sunset is around 9:30 here in Berlin, and the light lingers for an hour or more after that. So it really gives you plenty of time to go out for a bike ride or a run, or even after you've done your grocery shopping and cooking for dinner after work. Other days, I might just meet some friends out in a park, or I like meeting people on the streets at a Späti for one of these great German summer drinks, like a Radler or a Aperol Spritz. This late light also makes this a great time of year to go camping, for example. Even if you were to head out after a work day and drive or ride your bike to a camping spot somewhere, you still got some hours to get your tent set up and all of this stuff before it really gets dark.
Yeah, totally. I would also agree with all of that, guys. This has actually made me really want to head out right now and run and jump into some kind of body of water. But I also just wanted to add that I've lived here for a while now, and I still can't believe how businesses in Germany are so free and easy in the summer. Mm-hmm. They just randomly close when it's too hot. They declare a hitzefrei or heat-free day, and they'll just shut down. Sometimes there will just be a note on the door of a cafe or another business that says, "Gone to the lake. We'll see you tomorrow." So they will just stop what they're doing and enjoy a summer day, which is quite inspiring, really. So I might try and take that on
for sure.
this summer. And it's also worth noting that in July and August, a lot of places, restaurants, cafes, shops, they will just close for 3 weeks, 4 weeks sometimes. So Germans tend to take long summer holidays, not as long as the Scandinavians, I've heard. They're taking 4 to 6 weeks.
You're talking about our colleagues over at the local Sweden, Rachel.
Well, we have heard they take a long summer break, which is lovely.
It is lovely. It is lovely. There's more important things to life than work. Just the idea that you're a business owner, you're not obsessed with squeezing as much money as you can out of your business. You just think, you know what? I'm going to close. I'm going to be relaxed. Going to go to the lake. It's lovely.
Yeah, it's lovely in theory, but when you're trying to get something, you are just like, oh my goodness, why they've just got a notice up saying, "Oh, we're off to the lake." You're like, sorry, what?
It's true. I've actually had it the other way round. In winter in Bielitz, everything's closed there when it's not Spargelzeit. And I saw a note on the door saying, away for 7 months, back for 3 months of the year. Wait, that's not maths, but yes.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's it. If they don't want to do something, they won't. And that's something we could all learn from.
Agreed.
Okay, that's it for this week and this series. Thank you, as always, to all of our listeners. Check out the show notes for the stories we've been talking about today. Remember to give us your feedback and share this podcast with your friends and your family if you think they'd enjoy some of the topics we've been talking about. This week's panellists have been Imogen Goodman and Paul Krantz, and our sound engineer is Rhys Edwards. I'm Rachel Loxton. We hope you enjoyed listening, and we'll catch up again in September. Have a great summer.